Hey guys, I'm John Park and welcome to another tutorial series. In today's demonstration, I'm going to show you guys my design and illustration techniques for this particular painting. Let's get started. Alright, so typically I like to start off with more of a portrait-sized format kind of canvas, and generally the size that I usually work with is anywhere from about 3,000 to 4,000 pixels in height. I generally work this way only for really just for own digital reasons, so I can kind of zoom in and get a lot of the quality of the image to read, and also it helps if you're gonna do any printing for clients or for presentation sake. So the way I like to start a lot of my sketches is by doing a really rough preliminary sketch, just outlining kind of the basic design, shape, and proportion. A lot of times in this phase it helps me to kind of figure out a lot of the I guess kind of questions or areas that are a bit vague to me, whether it's a design detail or a certain type of gesture or shape or anything like that. So at this phase it's really easy for me to kind of figure that out through like a really quick line drawing and then kind of proceed with the painting. So as you see here, I'm just kind of working in the part of the shoulder. I blocked in like what I think might be a cool head, or a good pose for the head shape, and then I kind of work in kind of the arm here, and I'm thinking of like of a side pose this time where the character's kind of in a side position and maybe possibly holding a shield or a weapon of some sort. So that's kind of the basic idea. A lot of times, you know, if I'm ever confused about a pose, I actually get a lot of my inspiration from photographs, or pre-existing poses that I would find online or through photography. So that's a lot of kind of how I imagine a lot of the characters' poses. So just starting to think about kind of the fabric draping behind the character, almost like a cape, so to speak, and kind of working in kind of the I guess the headpiece here. It might be cool, like maybe what if the head was completely covered and we just see the peak of the face. Again, this is all a part of the Assassin series, so you know, a big design element that I've kind of created for myself is you never truly see the assassin's face, only, you know, elements of their mask and kind of, you know, showcasing more of the costuming aspect of their character. So I guess it's kind of like a shitty excuse for saying I don't want to paint the faces, but you know, this is it kind of gives it like a slightly more, I guess, mysterious feel if it stays within the realm of like it being a little bit hidden, I guess. Anyways, going on to the drawing, I'm basically just blocking in some ideas, some design details, things that I think might be cool. And a lot of times if it doesn't quite work out, I actually like to even, you know, just even test out things, you know, see if it looks good as a quick test, and if it doesn't look good, then I'll just erase it, just like what I did with the armor or the shield that I had here. I was thinking maybe it might be cool to have a larger shield of some sort. Maybe something like this. And then position the character's foot up high. And then the left leg, position it lower. So I'm just gonna move my sketch up because I'm losing a little bit of real estate on the bottom, and you can just see kind of, you know, it's just working in the general anatomy in the pose here to see if it fits, to see if it feels right. And maybe our character here is probably standing on a larger boulder of some sort, or maybe has his or her foot on maybe some sort of slab of rock or concrete, something along the lines of that. Working a little bit of the headdress here. A lot of times, like even when I figure out 80% of the pose, I'll even go back on top and just kind of constantly rework the drawing, because I would say if you're not happy with the drawing, you probably won't be happy with the overall painting. So it's best to be sure that you're pretty content with at least the drawing direction, so that you're somewhat content with the pose and the overall feel of the painting. So that's one thing that I always remembered my instructors telling me is, really figure out what's behind the drawing, and then figure out the rest of the painting. So even like little things like adjusting the foot, or even figuring out like whether the foot's going to be turned in or turned out. Like there's a lot of like little things that that I always try to figure out beforehand. So I'm just going to title this Assassin Blue. I don't know if the assassin's going to be blue, but I knew that I definitely wanted to give it a simple code name. And what's great about Photoshop is you can quickly alter your drawings or the proportions of your drawings. So it's easy for me to just kind of grab the arm here and just kind of extend the length. Just gonna go ahead and just erase away a little bit of the extra noise here. So that way I can continue working on the mid torso area and going back to the cape here. Maybe working a little bit of detail on the shoulder here, or I don't know if I want more of like an armor plate. I think that's kind of what I ended up with ultimately in the final. But even at this phase, it's like just thinking more simplistically about just the shape. So thinking about just the proportions really allow you to think really simplistically and I guess safely about kind of your general proportion direction. And then thinking about maybe it might be cool to have a mask instead. So I thought it might be kind of cool to have some sort of assassin, medieval inspired kind of helmet or mask that the character would be basically disguised in. And maybe some extra fabric here, or maybe hanging a little lower. So there's a lot of different possibilities for where we can take this design. So usually when I'm at this phase, depending on the design or the complexity of the image, I'll kind of allow myself to sketch maybe 30 minutes to about an hour or two, just really figuring out kind of the direction of my design before I even commit, or before I even think about painting, So I'm just kind of trying to feel out, what makes sense or what looks good to me on a drawing level before even thinking about the painting. I know a lot of this stuff sounds like repetitive, where I'm just constantly drilling in, draw before you paint, but it really is true. I mean, you want to make sure you have a fairly good fundamental lay-in before you figure out the rest of the image. So just kind of refining and trying to see like if there's any other cool versions or opportunities for, you know, maybe something on the tip of the hood, or maybe I can add in some more details on the helmet. So just adding in a little bit more refinement or some more ideas on the mask. Some sort of like weird pig nose or something. And you know it's funny actually. A lot of times when even at this phase, I can start to feel myself getting pretty indecisive, just because, you know, we're working with a fairly blank canvas. And I think what generally helps is if you don't know what you're drawing, you got to have a general theme in mind, whether it's a character, vehicle, environment. Even for in this case it is a character, you have to know exactly what you're going to be designing, just as a rough idea, so that you can start to develop key ideas or some sense of I guess drawing behind the idea. Because a lot of times, like even looking at what I'm doing here, there's times when I felt like I was being indecisive about the clothing, or even indecisive about the mask. And so what you're seeing right here is just me kind of just experimenting and just not really, you know, figuring out a direction. So what I decided to do here is I created another layer, and I wanted to see if there was another cooler version of a face, because I don't think I was really quite happy with what I initially blocked in. So I was just kind of thinking, well, maybe if I can have the face slightly peeking in or peeking out just a little bit, maybe just the part of the nose or the chin or something. But I think, I don't know, I feel like maybe the mask was still the best idea, but just to kind of see, just to make sure that I kind of tried everything out before committing to the painting. I wanted to make sure that I was fairly happy or content with the drawing. So a lot of times you do the drawing and, you know, it might look good, but it might not be necessarily what you want or what you expected. So it's always good to just, you know, scribble in something really quick just to make sure you covered all your bases. Even like an open-ended mask, I was thinking like, oh, that might be kind of cool, you know, character looking out into the distance. That might be kind of cool, something slightly a bit more revealing on the face, but still has that more kind of hidden characteristic, because we're hiding half the face in mask. But I think at the end of the day, I ended up just kind of picking and deciding that it was going to just be the full covered mask. So what you'll see here is just me kind of fussing around a little bit more before continuing on with the painting here. I think that's one fun thing is maybe even giving yourself a slight time limit or restriction to generate and come up with a bunch of quick concepts, just so that you kind of stick with one. So I'm just kind of showing you the difference between the first one and the second one. And you know, I was kind of thinking, oh, that might be kind of cool to have a character, you know, looking off into the distance. You know, it doesn't have to be so entirely covered up, but yeah, I think going back to what I was saying, it's actually quite helpful when you have you know, a series of sketches that you would do in a short amount of time, because I think it helps you to kind of just think about the general idea without getting too specific. I think I got a little too specific here, even at this phase, because I got too caught up with, you know, finessing the mask and turning the head outward, playing with details and things like that, when it really just doesn't matter. I mean, I think this could have been a completely different version. but it definitely helps to have, you know, a bunch of different design directions, so that when you're ready to paint, you can just jump right into it. You know, you've already made that decision, you've made that call a while back, and so you can definitely do that. So I titled this one as option 2, and this is obviously our first iteration. I don't think I was happy or too happy about the slot holes for the eyes, so I kept it kind of open here. And there's something that I like about it having no face, or no distinct eye hole. So I think we're gonna go with this one here, and yeah, get started on our underlay painting. So starting with, you know, the layer underneath, I'm gonna pick a texture brush here, and I'm actually gonna use what is called a pattern stamp tool. So the pattern stamp tool is something that I imported, and it's underneath the clone stamp. If you guys haven't heard about it, check it out. A very effective tool. It gives you a lot of room for experimenting in color and texture and things like that. But it gives you a wide variety of, you know, just palettes to immediately choose from. So I'm just gonna quickly do a underpainting here. Go to my handy dandy texture brush. It seems to be the most cooperative, because this is such a big file that sometimes the brushes do lag. So I'm just gonna give it a quick wash here, and I'm thinking about kind of this more burnt, you know, umber, or kind of more of a reddish orange tone here, and giving it as kind of that nice wash that you would see in a lot of oil paintings. That way it kind of gives the illusion of an underpainting per se. So I spoke about this concept in my other previous tutorial, but basically the concept of an underpainting is it just gives you a nice base for a sketch to start off with, so that when you start painting, you're basically, you have a sketch that's pretty much blocking in the shapes, the value, and the general light direction, and then all you're basically adding in is really the local color and values. So it's kind of like you're kind of figuring out the basic shadow volumes and shapes before you commit to full color. So what I'm doing here for this particular one is I'm not going to necessarily block out the shadow tones per se, but more importantly, I'm going to block out just the silhouette, and I'm going to do it in this more painterly fashion, just so that when I paint, I can kind of have a reveal of that orange seep through. So I'm going to duplicate this so we have a version of this. I'm gonna go ahead and actually start colorizing or painting on some actual, you know, opaque color on here. I'm thinking about something a bit more of the bluish tone here. I'm just gonna directly paint that on top using my texture brush. And what's cool is you can actually see a little bit of that orange seeping through. It gives it a really nice effect, you know. It's kind of has this nice like undertone or wash underneath. So it just adds a lot of depth to the painting, you know. I'm gonna go ahead and then color pick here and maybe just even adjust the colors. I know we said assassin blue, but I think this is just a little too colorful, so I'm gonna knock that blue down a little bit. I think eventually what I end up with the final is more closer to, you know, it's still in that purpley tint of a cloak, but I definitely kind of diffuse the saturation a bit. I start blocking in basically bits of the armor here. One thing that's really good to do is think about your painting more graphically. You know, instead of getting too caught up with the actual forms and stuff like that, just think about it just kind of like, what is the local color? Think of it very simplistically, very graphically. So I'm thinking that it might be cool to have, if there's something that's colored or it's saturated, it might be nice to have something that is slightly desaturated for the actual costume. So I'm introducing a little bit of that orange or that red back into it, because I felt like it was too blue, just because gray up against the yellow feels, it tends to get really it kind of, just through color relationship, it feels very cold and blue. So I just wanted something a little bit warmer there, temporarily at least. Maybe like a reddish kind of tone here. But you can see it's at this phase it's like a coloring book, you know? Like, you know, when you're like 5 years old, you used to have those like those baby coloring books, and you color basically in between the lines. And that's what this feels like, you know? It's more like coloring book style. We're really just trying to figure out, you know, what are your basic colors without even thinking about gradations or shadows or anything like that. It's just kind of like, oh, what are your colors? So definitely trying to figure that out as we continue to paint. I just want to continue figuring out, like, okay, well, what does the rest of this clothing look like? If it is kind of this brownish tint, you know, how does that just look as an overall costume, you know, color scheme? You know, maybe it looks too low tech, like too peasant like. And the only reason why I said that, only reason why I think that is just because there's nothing very vibrant. Everything feels very warm and muted. So, you know, it's always good to kind of block things in and just see what you get out of it. Maybe a slightly brighter value, just to kind of give it much more of a brighter type of graphic read. Maybe the armor can be darker. I don't know. Just kind of seeing, just really playing with these ideas, you know. And maybe the guard that's in the center, on the waist here, whether it kind of looks like a big utility belt, but basically it's kind of this this, you know, torso guard. But I thought that might be kind of cool to have it as a darker value. Just gonna block in that arm there. Maybe have a much more brighter kind of shoulder armor. And notice when I do that, immediately you can't have that relationship of the arm being the same value, because then it just reads as one material, right? So when you guys are painting, just make sure you always want to have nice juxtapositions. If you have things that are in the same value, it's going to read as the same material, or it's just all going to kind of blend in together without any separation. So notice how I have the cloak to the white fabric to kind of the guard that's in the center. You know, the difference, the thing that's separating those two is the fact that there is a white fabric, right? So that at least we understand graphically we have a white or lighter kind of material there. I'm just like messing around, like, oh, what if the cloak was green? You know? And that definitely works. But I think there's something really nice about keeping it more of that royal, or like that off purple color. Just double checking my layers, seeing if everything looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and start blocking in the shield here. Now I think in terms of material, the way I indicated that definitely looks like it's made out of wood. I'm just gonna keep that for now, just because until I kind of finish blocking everything in, I think I'll have a better idea of how everything looks and feels together. You guys might be wondering why I decided to kind of still have some of the orange peek through, mainly because I still want that underpainting or that undertone to kind of seep through a little bit. I think that's kind of what gives it a nice illustrative quality, is literally just that orange seeping through. So I definitely want to show that, at least, you know. Now this is me just kind of, I'm trying to figure out the shadow shapes at this point, because obviously I think the graphic I'm fairly happy with. Now I think graphically we have to start thinking about the overall graphic design of the shadows, right? So we have the shadow on the underside of the hood, and maybe just some of the shadow shapes that, you know, are being created by the actual garment itself. Maybe some, like, you know, creases and details here. Maybe just a darker shadow shape right on the head, you know. And a lot of times, like, you have to just try it out, because I think in terms of lighting principle it makes sense, but then a lot of times that, yeah, it just might not look good, you know, just because it overcomplicates the image. So I think I finally decided on, like, maybe we should just keep it simple. Let's see here, figuring out a little bit more of the shoulder padding. Maybe a darker value here definitely helps. I think even, like, maybe the value on some of the materials could even use a bit more breakup. So I'm just kind of finessing. You know, I think as I'm blocking in just the basic shadow values, I'm trying to finesse and see how everything works as a group, you know, as an overall, I guess, as an overall you know, set of colors that are kind of being put next to each other. Just kind of defining a little bit of the draping of the cloth here. Now, again, I'm not sure if any of you guys caught the previous tutorials, but if you guys are ever confused about clothing or how some of the clothing detail works, please use reference. I actually use quite a bit of reference for my work, you know, whether it's poses or if there's any detail in terms of, like, drapery or anything like that, I always have on the side. But it definitely helps. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of referring back to my pattern stamp tool, and this is what's giving me this nice variety of color. And actually the pop of light that I'm getting from this is actually quite nice, and it's giving me a really nice you know, graphic breakup on the armor and kind of the rest of the suit, or the rest of the material around it. So I'm going to use a little bit more of that pattern stamp tool on the helmet here. We kind of get this nice, like, reflective material or reflective sheen to it, you know. When I turn off the line drawing, you know, it's it just acts as a visual guide, but you can start to see how the painting is coming together, especially when you turn it on and off. You start to understand if there's good enough structure in your painting, if the lighting makes sense, if all the edges and everything read. Adding a little bit more detail to the boots here. Alright, so I'm going to continue to use the pattern stamp on even the boots, just trying it out, just to get a little bit more variety of color there. Even selecting a different range of more textures to even apply to the shield. So again, really nice when you don't know or if you don't really feel too confident about like what kind of colors to put there. Again, the pattern stamp tool just gives you such nice variety of like textures to different types of colors that you could potentially put in, that literally just kind of gets indicated on as you paint. So it's really nice. So I'm just going to go ahead and start sketching in just some smaller details, because I think at this point, even at this point of the illustration, I'm still trying to figure out some of the smaller cadences of the design, which is mainly material indication. So whether materials are darker, lighter, whether it's has stitching that's cross-hatched. So these are some of the choices that I need to make that are gonna take a little bit of time, but is very much crucial to making this piece work. So I'm just gonna see what else I can add here. Maybe just even an accent of more silver or something. Maybe some sort of like ring-like design that's kind of connected to the upper part of the actual kind of like mid-torso armor, or this like harness, this belt harness that our character's wearing. And it's kind of nice just the way it's kind of ambiguously being placed there. You get a glint or a little hint of like kind of of color and some sort of like material specularity. Excuse me. So I think I decided to go with a little bit more of a brighter shield, and just using red as an accent. I believe my color choice for this was actually inspired by a photo that I was looking at. It had a really cool, had a really interesting actually an armor that the character was, that this particular cosplay or LARPer was carrying, that had these types of patterns on it. So I'm definitely borrowing from that. Just kind of refining the edges a little bit more here. I might even go a little bit brighter, since it is white, and the direction of light, I'm even though it hasn't really been set in stone, I'm just gonna make the local color of this white just to punch it out a little bit, and carve out the face a little bit more here, give it a bit more of a defined shadow there. And carve a little bit more cast shadow right here. I think I'm going to add just a little bit of a highlight right here, just to kind of punch it out a bit. And some more forms, just subtle form change. Notice how slow the process of painting can be. It's constantly just slowing down and thinking about each decision, whether it's, you know, big or small, thinking about kind of the readability of your character, from a macro to micro level, and constantly just judging whether it's reading the way you planned from sketch to painting. So I'm constantly kind of I'm kind of weighing and seeing how everything is looking and balancing out. Maybe just a little bit more on the fold here. I might even just carry this over this aesthetic of this underlying like kind of material. Just going a little bit darker here, just to suggest a little bit of ambient occlusion, shadow, just to start slowly figure out kind of the you know, the hard shadows for for my clothing here. But I think I'm gonna go a little bit more ambient, like things like arms and shields that are close by. I'm gonna darken down the forms next to it, just to show overlap, but no cast shadows just yet. The only cast shadows that I really have is on the obvious areas, like the helmet and anything that's obviously in the darker folds. But what's great about working this way is that I kind of painted as if the character's being ambiently lit. So it's kind of nice, because if there is a certain amount of light direction, then it's easy for me to kind of switch things around. But for the most part, it is fairly ambiently lit, so that I can at least kind of affect the intensity of light or the direction of light fairly easily, because I have majority of my information there. Kind of defining a little bit of the hands here. Obviously I want kind of the character to hold a sword, so I'm gonna have to properly model out the hands here. And even like the details that are integrated here, make sure that this also makes sense as well. Just continue to work in some more details here. I guess at this point, it's good to kind of like look at everything and see, like, if you look at the graphic design, the cloak is obviously dark and the clothing underneath is brighter. So at this point, you know, I'm definitely thinking about, you know, how to create accents, whether it's through design or through materials. And so I'm just trying to play with different types of, you know, what if obviously the character in the end of the painting, I actually end up with the sword, but I was playing with the idea of like, what if there's kind of this contraption, this assassin contraption where he's actually holding like a dark blade, or the blade actually kind of comes out of the forearm, just like Assassin's Creed, because this is obviously a very Assassin's Creed inspired kind of theme. So just kind of playing with that and seeing how everything kind of comes together and looks. I'm actually going to go ahead and decide to make this part a little bit darker, because I felt like it was getting a little hard to read what's going on in the hand, because there's just so much stuff. And also even including the actual arm here. The material here, I think like the actual fabric can actually be a lot darker. So I'm going to go ahead and make this darker here. So now there's a clear separation between shoulder padding and the wrist guard. Right now we have shoulder padding, wrist guard, and we have the fabric. So everything is properly isolated and still grouped in a way that it's easy for us to read. Maybe just some more like buckle details here. And maybe just carrying this little silver kind of material lining onto the basically this torso belt that I have. So little accents of color here. I'm just going to define the shoulder pad just a little bit. And notice the entire time I still have my line drawing on. Because again, it just helps reinforce all the decisions that I'm making right now. And it just acts as a guideline, So whether or not I want to stick with it, or I can choose to break out of it. But it definitely helps. I'm going to define the knuckle here just a little bit. There's something fun about actually, you can actually draw as you paint, because the way you draw is effectively kind of the way you paint. So this is a good test to those who actually have really good drawing ability. Your paintings will actually look fairly good, because the structure of your drawing will make will kind of predetermine how good your painting will effectively look. Even though painting is a lot about lighting and shapes and color harmony and balance and stuff like that, but what's underneath all that painting is actually a really good drawing. So it's like one of those moments where you're actually testing your drawing out to see if it actually works. Maybe some sort of like belt harness here. Maybe just like, I don't know if 2 works, but maybe 1 singular one might work. Yeah, let's just go ahead with 1 here. I'm just gonna fill in this hole right here. And I think I'm going to start introducing just a little bit of a secondary kind of color here, just to start showing, I guess, kind of the slightly more highlighted areas of the cloth. Because right now, if you look at it, we have our mid-tones and our dark tones. So this is a little bit of our lighter tones. It's not necessarily the brightest area, but it's definitely just to kind of help give it a little bit more form, or carving the form a bit. The top here, however, is gonna be the brightest point, and you can just see kind of how I'm using that to kind of help create really sharp, you know, points of highlight. Thinking like maybe it might be nice to have a large triangular crease here, but seems a bit distracting, so probably carve it down and lose that highlight a bit, or that that shadow a bit. It was a bit harsh, actually. So what I'm doing is I actually decided to turn off the line drawing layer, and I'm using now just what I have. So if I need to refer back to the design, I can go back to the line drawing, but now I'm just using basically only the painting. And you can see, actually, if you look at the actual painting, it's fairly efficient looking. There's areas where, you know, it literally looks like 1 or 2 strokes. Areas where, you know, it kind of has the nice marks that we made. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of define this little area here. And what I was thinking was kind of the way cloaks or a fabric would actually bunch up. I kind of wanted this like pinch here, and kind of have it drape in front of the character. And that's kind of how it's sitting on the character, actually. So I wanted to convey that just through, you know, adding in like a nice crisp, you know, drapery right here, this form. And man, fabric is the hardest thing to render for me. It kicks my ass every single time. It's one of those times where I felt like I could have spent a little bit more time just doing more figurative studies, or, you know, doing a little bit more life painting or something. Adding a little bit of highlight here, maybe just some materials. It's maybe much more of a brighter type of material here. Just be careful. I know, like, the mode that I used was color dodge, and it can get a little, you know, sometimes it be a little overdone. So I try to use it very, very sparingly. All right, so I'm gonna go back to the actual drape here, to the fabric. And just try to carve out a better shape, because I felt like the weight's draping over the shoulder. Even though my drawing it felt okay, but when I look at it in painting form, the shapes just don't really look good. So I'm just trying to find a way if I can extend it out, maybe it can look better, or just simplifying some areas and extending some other parts of the area might help. But I felt like in general, it feels a little, it just, there's no real nice elegant flow to the image. Just feels like, it feels like when the folds don't look, you know, if they're not kind of elegant and flowy, it looks really kind of thick and clumsy. So that's one thing that I try to do by just thinning out or simplifying the back a little bit and just adding more sharper creases. You know, it just indicates that it's a bit of a lighter material. Thinking maybe I can add just a little bit of, you know, cloth or some sort of material like on the bottom half of the feet, because it's still pretty unresolved. So I want to make sure that stuff it's gonna work. Let's go ahead and continue this down. Even though that underpainting is nice, you know, we gotta figure out this part. So I was thinking, like, you know, maybe a lighter material might look good. You know, it's not for certain until you try it out. But I think at this point I was figuring, well, you know, let's just give it a shot, see how that looks. But notice when I do that, it starts to kind of flatten out the character. Like, there's no real composition of graphic design. Everything kind of goes light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. So what it ends up looking like, it just kind of looks like he looks like a candy cane or something, you know? Like, it looks weird too. It kind of looks like he's wearing, you know, socks or something that go up to his knees. So I think going with the darker material makes more sense, and it just makes the focal point, especially graphically, keep our eye on the actual character. Just gonna erase and edit a little bit here. Just gonna indicate maybe just a little bit of a reflected light or something, or a highlight that's running through this material. This, maybe it's like leather or something. Maybe this side of the foot's actually catching a bit more light, so it's obviously a lot brighter. Okay, let's see here. It's going to continue to work a little bit more on the folds here. This is obviously one of the most difficult parts of the painting, because you want a rhythm. You know, you want like a nice rhythm of having the folds, you know, but still kind of retain a little bit of that composition. Again, I was trying it out, like maybe if I can darken it down, but again, graphically it just kind of kills the readability of it. So just gonna keep it a bit more simple here. And notice how far back I'm painting. I'm just looking at it from, you know, from a distance actually. And I think this part here can be a little bit more slimmer, so I'm gonna chop this down a bit. It's like way too round. He kind of looks like he has a turtle back or something. So I'm just gonna kind of thin that out a little bit. So you can kind of see the before and after here. All right. Let's see here. So at this phase, it's, you know, I think there's a lot of things that are working for us. Now I think I want to bring in just some elements of backgrounds that might be interesting. This is a cool option. This is a really cool option. I thought this would be great for a background, so I'm gonna copy it and plug it into our little file here. Let's look at a couple more here. I thought maybe something like this might be really cool as an interior, but I'm looking for something a bit more natural. Just sifting through my photos here. Oh, this is pretty cool too. We'll go ahead and we'll continue to look. Actually, there's still a lot of different variety. This might be an interesting option here. More of like an interior. And I'm just kind of like looking at all the different lighting scenarios. I thought this was great. This is kind of the one I actually ended up going with. But the thing that I wanted to talk about was, by testing out your environment, you're able to quickly kind of set the scene, you know, and more importantly, you're able to kind of quickly set the scene of your lighting scenario. So if you have like more of a lighting scenario like this, which is kind of like a little photo piece that I grabbed, you can kind of see how it looks, you know, how the character could potentially look in like more of a forest-like scene, you know, with kind of a brighter background. You know, the character can look very stealthy up against just kind of the foliage and all that stuff. So definitely looks really cool, you know. And just using the dark shapes to kind of help frame it, but make sure that it still looks fairly okay. So I'm gonna kind of pull this over just as a test. You know, I always like to do this a lot with a lot of my paintings, is, you know, without having to, you know, make too quick of a judgment on what to paint in. I think it's always fun to kind of post in just like a really low resolution image or part of an image, just to kind of see how it can look compositionally for the entire image, you know. Just gonna shrink the character just a little bit here, just kind of alter the proportions just a tad bit. Just gonna simplify this background and just kind of see if this might be a really cool palette, you know. And again, this works perfectly well as a color palette. And that's what I love about kind of ambiguously using images. You instantly get like a nice setting, you know. Maybe just kind of vignette the background just a little bit, just to see how this looks. I know this isn't what we ended up with the final. However, just to show you guys kind of my initial thought process, this is something that I'll always kind of tinker with, you know, kind of playing with color and mood, just very graphically too, just thinking about kind of the readability of our character. So I knew that I wanted some sort of dark to light kind of gradation, so light being on the right side and dark being on the left side. And I think that's one thing that kind of really sparked an idea. Was as I was painting this, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. What if I add some sort of like ledge here or something like that? And I think one of the photos that I used in there was an exact match. And just trying to see if like it might be cool to frame our character up against some sort of dark. Immediately gives us nice compositional ideas, you know? It's kind of like, oh, well, how does that look? Because now we start to look at the object, or we start to look at the character, whether it's isolated or whether it's completely, you know, being backlit or it's being frontlit. You know, we start to kind of look at it graphically. So this is where it kind of brings me to my next little experiment here, where I'm going to start bringing this photo here and just kind of look at it as a larger image. And there's that little stone there worked perfectly. It's quite funny. Or even this image here, where, you know, we have it more of an interior setting, but I think it felt too busy, so I'm probably not going to go with that. But this felt really interesting. This is a nice setting. This is actually more Egyptian columns that I really liked, and I just liked the fact that it had those lighting values that we were looking at before. It had the dark on the left side and the light on the right side. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to basically paint on top of this and fudge out the details, and I'm only going to use the colors and the lighting scheme. So I'm going to just kind of blend and blur all this out, just kind of kill a lot of this detail, because again, our painting isn't necessarily about these Egyptian columns, even though a lot of those details are pretty cool, but it's going to be more about just the scenery of maybe just some ruins that are quite undefined, but give us kind of a nice setting. So I'm going to kind of blend this out here, and I'm going to go ahead and actually put this on a mode just to see what we get, but we might just keep it normal. I'm going to tinker a little bit with some of these options here. A lot of these options that I play with always give me a nice little variety of color, but I think I'm going to try putting it on soft light and just kind of dial down a little bit, just so we kind of get that nice warmth coming through. But I'd probably end up just saving that for later, because this image is already fairly warm. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and kind of blur or blend out a lot of the photo details here, and just kind of use that as basically as my base. So let's just go ahead and keep this stuff separate. We'll keep it as our reference folder for so you guys can kind of see what I've collected here. Also, I think I'm gonna extend the light here, and you can see as I'm kind of finessing the light here in the back, just that light that's seeping through right there, we get a nice transitional area where we have a little bit of that light, actually a lot of the light behind our character, and we can see kind of a nice kind of you know, graphic design or graphic shape of our character, which is basically the silhouette. So this silhouette helps us to kind of isolate a lot of the forms that we see. You know, we almost want something much more simple. just because of the fact that it's a fairly complicated looking silhouette. So the fact that we have a simple looking background, it allows us to understand the object, or it allows us to understand our character a little bit more clearly and more easily. I'm gonna go ahead and do a little bit more light here. Maybe have it darker there. Bring in a little bit more warmth here. I think I really like the bounce light. So you notice when I go dark, notice how the cloth right on the bottom section becomes a brighter element, right? So it's just interesting how the background can really change our perception of how we read the character. It's quite funny, actually. Have a bit more of a slightly more defined edge here. Maybe bring in a little bit more of that brighter light source. And again, the painting isn't necessarily about the background, so I'm gonna try to keep it as loose as I can without getting too specific, because then the painting will literally become about the background more than the actual character itself. But so I definitely want the character to be kind of the star of the image. So I want to make sure that the focus is about the character, and everything kind of around it is going to kind of help drive the readability of the character. So I'm going to use a little bit of screen here to kind of pull using my pattern stamp here. You can use pattern stamp or just normal brushes, but I just want to get a little bit more brighter color here. I'm going to sample the colors here and just kind of get that going. Maybe a little bit brighter. Instantly we have a nice little framing device for our character. You know, like our eye definitely goes way up there. You know, it's kind of causing or creating a lot of tension. So, you know, our eye is able to quickly understand, you know, that is the main focus. You know, because we're playing with dark versus light. I'll brighten up the ground a little bit here. I'm gonna start finessing a little bit more of the columns here, just to simplify it. I think I want just more of a simple transition here. We'll bring in a little bit of that warmth and that gradation. Same here. I'm just gonna simplify this section just a little bit. I'm just using the smudge tool to kind of blend out any brush strokes or any details that kind of don't really help us. In a lot of this stuff here, it can kind of go away really. doesn't really help us. So I'm just gonna kind of blend that out. Again, using my my art brush here. It's like one of the best. It's like one of the best tools. No joke. I think I want to go brighter here because I was looking at the entire image and it felt really flat on the right side. So I made a creative decision to say, you know what, let's just go brighter, just so that it's you know, compositionally, when we look at the image, there's kind of a nice graphic rhythm. And again, I do apologize. I keep using the term like graphic design, but it's kind of what painting is. It's all about graphic design. It's about just kind of how you read your image, as you know, with colors and contrast. It really is graphic design. So it's kind of looking at it in that manner and seeing how it all kind of comes together. I was looking at this and maybe seeing if I can spot a little bit of design detail, but I think I'll try to just plug this in, but I don't think it really does anything for us, so I'm just gonna take that away, see if there's anything here. It's not much for us there, so I'm just gonna fade that out a little bit. Just gonna add a little bit more texture here. I'm just kind of experimenting at this point, just seeing if there's anything else I can add to give it a little bit of just some visual depth here. Again, still trying to stay within kind of my value range. I don't want to have it be too distracting. Let's definitely kind of give the foot here a little bit more clearance, so it can actually sit on that edge. So let's go ahead and just erase out. So it makes sense for our character to actually kind of plant his foot on that ground, and just add a little cast shadow there. So at this point, I've kind of hinted that the light direction is obviously going to come from the right. So a lot of my highlights, or anything that's going to receive light, it's gonna hit the right side of the character. Any obvious like blings or anything like that. So the foot is definitely one. And again, the character is ambiently kind of lit, so the fact that it's ambiently lit, it kind of allows us to, you know, kind of get away with 90% of the lighting scenario. So if there's anything, I think I can probably darken down the right side, or the left side, I mean, the left side of the character, to suggest some shadow forms or something like that. Start indicating our the handle of the sword. Just gonna define this just a little bit more. See how this looks if we make this more of a darker band. It starts to look a little too busy, so I'm just gonna go ahead and just keep it a lighter value. So you'll notice again, I'm just kind of going back and forth. There's times where when I'm working on one section, I'll kind of look back, and allows us to kind of judge or look at the entire image and just kind of see what else we can fix or what's wrong with the image. Let's just clean the edge a little bit here. On our character. Maybe add just a little extra layer of fabric detail. Just gonna simplify this area a little bit. Just gonna go ahead and add that extra little bit of fabric here. Because right now it just looks kind of like a lower part of the character's garment. So it feels a bit boring, so I definitely want to play with that idea. For those of you who are interested in even looking at kind of more of this kind of stuff or this type of genre, there's a folder of reference images that I've collected, and it's called LARPing. And LARPers, or LARPing, is basically kind of another form of costume role-playing, and you have a lot of these fanatics who actually go out and they build these really elaborate costumes that either represent, you know, different time periods, like medieval, Lord of the Rings. You got like more fantasy-based ones. You got more that are based in kind of anime land, and it's actually quite really great. It's actually really cool because for us it's kind of free reference, you know, and we can use it as a way to kind of see how they've they put together the clothing and how it kind of looks in a certain lighting scenario, and it's just a great way to study how that stuff looks, and you know how it can be applied to our paintings or our illustrations. So it's quite interesting. So I'm gonna go ahead and add just a little bit more detail to the foot here, but not as much. I don't want to get too carried away, because again, the painting isn't about the foot, it's not about the legs, you know. So I kind of want just enough to kind of suggest, you know, that there is a leg there. Obviously, I don't want it to just be like a dark silhouette, but you know, I don't want to have it fight, because this is a pretty loose sketch. Again, this is live. This is about an hour and close to an hour and 20 minutes in, and we're basically getting pretty close. So this is where I'm going to start darkening the left side, because again, that part of the character is pretty bright. I don't mind it as much, but it's a bit on the brighter side, so I'm going to just tone it down a bit. Using either overlay or darken or multiply works. You know, a lot of different, there's infinite different ways that we can actually make this work. But I think what I just decided to do was just darken it down and simplify kind of the way the fabric reads, you know. And then from here, now since I'm getting a little bit of the darker side or forms of the fabric, I definitely want to start suggesting a little bit more, you know, some more of the darker values here. You know, how that's going to transition into the folds, and notice how the light side of my fabric has kind of become the highlight now, right? Again, I'm just gonna jump back and forth a little bit, but this side here is really dark, so I'm just gonna use the opportunity to kind of bump it up a little bit. Maybe brighten up this whole section. Just gonna simplify some of these forms a bit. Gonna lighten up that part, and maybe even just lighten up this entire area. Just kind of let some of the colors there bleed into the that kind of block that our character is standing on. It's nice. It's always nice to kind of keep at least the character on a separate layer so that I can isolate the character from the background fairly easily. Okay, just adding a little bit more color here. I put the brush on overlay just to give it a little bit more color vibrancy. I felt like it was getting a little dull, so I just want to try to just indicate just a little splash of color. Sometimes it might be a little too much, so just kind of take it away, but again, just kind of testing it out and see how that looks. This was causing a little bit of a harsh edge, so I'm going to just go ahead and let that blend out a little bit. And I'm just using the Texture 06. It has kind of a nice broad range kind of, you know, tooth to it. And obviously I'm adding a little bit more detail here, like little cracks and things like that. Definitely wanted to give it a little bit more of a, you know, like the characters, you know, kind of in like a ruin type of environment, but obviously not let it be literally kind of the Egyptian ruins. What was great about that image is that it literally gave me the color, the composition, and just the overall tone of the entire image. I mean, it was quite nice. So if you guys find a really cool image for your paintings, or a section of it, like, try to import it into Photoshop. Try to use that. Let that be a tool or an advantage for you, and try to capitalize on that. Try to make a really cool. Try to make your image work off of that. You know. I wanted the little ledge right there. Maybe part of that can jut out, but it's getting a little complex. Kind of like the simple read, you know. We'll add a little bit more architectural elements here. Even though it's a ruin, you know, I still want a little bit of some sort of repetition in our designs. So I'm just going to add that here. All right. Maybe just a little bit of a looser indication in the background. And maybe just one of those little architectural details or something peeking through here. And catching a little bit of light. Just gonna add just a little bit more, I guess, definition to some of these little areas here. Again, going back to my handy dandy, pattern stamp, just to kind of add a little bit of color in some areas that need it. Sometimes, again, like it's not always a must, but if you feel like it's lacking a little bit of color, and you just don't know why, your instinct is right, like go with your gut feeling and try to see what you can do to resolve that. There probably is a reason why something doesn't feel right, and when you look at the image you can immediately tell if something's off. So I'm adding my sword here. Now the thing about adding the blade of the sword is that the way I illustrated, or the way I made the mark, is that the blade is actually brighter, right? So it's a bright source. Now I don't want it to be bright, so I'm going to knock it down a bit, but I don't want it to be too dark that it confuses us, in terms of understanding whether it's a blade or if it's like just some weird architectural thing that's sticking out. So I want to make sure that this part's relatively clear. So I'm just going to go ahead and finesse it a little bit. Maybe add a little edge if that helps. But that starts to kind of kill the form a little bit. So let's just go ahead and darken down the entire thing, and then just add a little bit of a brighter source here. So if we want that bright source to be right where the red is, or like the lining of our character's garment is, then we can keep it bright there, and we can keep the rest of the blade dark. So at least graphically we kind of look at it as a fairly clear object from a distance. So that's not too bad. That seems to work, because again, there's all these like light, we have all these light combos that's happening in our image here. There's a lot of areas of light, dark, so the sword has to almost either be simple so that it can really pop out, or it has to kind of play with it, so that it stands out. I think that was the challenge of making this work, this image in general work. There's a lot of different play with light, So that's one other general rule of thumb is I think as we continue to paint, whether it's your own personal work or whether it's an environment or anything like that, we have to just remind ourselves that if you're gonna be painting something that's fairly complex, always remember the general rule of thumb of what is your overall graphic design or graphic read. What is the object butted up against? Is it dark? Is it light? These are some things that we should really try to try to be mindful of, because then it'll help control the clarity of the image truly, you know. So we want to make sure that we keep those basic rules in mind to kind of have better control over over the entire image, you know, no matter how simple or how complex it is. Maybe add in just a little bit more of the like reflective light, this blue. Again, I'm just trying it out, you know, see if that works. You know, if you don't like it, we can always paint it out. But there's something really nice. I think a lot of metallic objects and forms always pick up some sort of skylight. It's like the most, it's weird. Like, even though there might not be any skylight in the image itself, you know, but by indicating skylight, you instantly understand that, oh, hey, it's metallic. Like, our brain just it's like been programmed to understand that about all metallic objects. It's either that or it's like mega contrasty, you know. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add in a little bit of our little mask detail. Go to my handy dandy pattern stamp. That's kind of like the key tool for this painting today. Again, just a reminder, pattern stamp, guys, is under the clone stamp tool. Okay, the way to import your own textures, there's already a standard library of textures that Photoshop gives, but if you want to import your own textures, all you have to do is just bring it into Photoshop and set it as a defined pattern brush. That's it. As simple as that. Okay, I totally forgot about this side of the face here. Because when we start to zoom in, we're like, oh man, look how loose all this stuff is. So now we have to actually go and start defining a little bit more of this stuff. You know, there's brush strokes, which is really cool from a distance, but when we start to zoom in, it starts to kind of fall apart a little bit. So we want to make sure that a lot of this stuff is fairly decent looking, you know, when we zoom in. Maybe give a little bit of an edge here. Maybe an edge on the other side of that hoodie or something. I'm gonna erase this out. And I think a lot of this stuff here we can simplify. Just gonna, I know I want a little bit of like some crease or something here, but I think we can just kind of simplify the overall read of that headpiece. So I'm just gonna kind of dull it down a bit. Pull back, just kind of look at the overall read. I think that shadow is pretty bright, so I'm gonna see if there's a way for us to kind of lighten it up a little bit. So I'm just gonna get that here and just maybe add a little bit of a crease. Doesn't quite work. Take it away. But you can see how doing folds, it instantly gets really fussy. Like sometimes there's too much shit on there. I'm looking at it right now. I'm like, God, you know, let's just get rid of all that stuff. You don't need it. You know, only use the folds if it's going to help, you know, logically make sense of what's happening there. But I think just having folds there in general is just, if it doesn't help, it's not going to help, you know, the more folds I add. So I'm just going to simplify and just kind of knock all that stuff down. I'm gonna start to refine this edge a little bit more. This little fold here. And I think what's great about this section here is that I kind of want a slightly more defined area. So that we kind of understand what's happening to the cloth or to the fabric. Just using the edge of my brush just to kind of have a nice clean, really clean edge here. Maybe add in just a little bit more texture, but I don't think it quite needs it too much there. Let's add a little bit more definition. Maybe just a little bit more clarity on the actual armor here. I'm just gonna add just a bit more detail to the actual crease of our of the actual arm right there. Just so it doesn't kind of like stay all blobby, you know? Alright, so I was thinking at one point, I was like, oh, it might be cool to have multiple holes on the face. And looking at it, I'm like, it feels too like, I don't know, like a salt pepper shaker or something. It felt too like bug-like. So there's something really nice about like the elegance of the solid plate. So I think I'm just gonna kind of keep it as a solid plate more so than, you know, keeping it as a as kind of like, you know, having extra holes there. Just gonna go ahead and just define a little bit of this area here. And just add a little bit more blingage, you know, to some of this stuff here. Put on impressionist mode. Give it a little bit more, just more color variety, but more importantly, just give it a little bit more definition in some of the wrist guard here. Gonna add a little bit here. I don't know if it's causing too much attention, just because it starts to get a little muddled. So I'm just gonna instead maybe just add a very obvious cast shadow. So this is where, you know, we added an ambient occlusion shadow, so I'm just gonna reinforce that a little bit more by adding more clear darks anywhere that's overlapping. Because again, now we know where the light direction is coming from, and we're able to clearly, you know, make that that more apparent, you know, where the light and how it's affecting our character, the lighting of our character. So I'm gonna add a cast shadow here like that. Maybe give it slightly a bit more color, and maybe one here right on where the belt is. I think we got a little bit there on the mask, and reinforce that a little bit. It's cool. Okay, now we're at about an hour and 41 minutes. So at this phase of the sketch, and I call it a sketch because, you know, obviously if it was more of a detailed rendering, then it would look a lot more detailed, more specific, and more complicated. But you know, as a colored sketch painting, it's definitely doing what I want it to do. But at this point now, I'm just kind of going in there and picking and choosing just certain areas to kind of define, whether it's like areas of like the buckles, again, areas of defining the shape of our actual garment. I think the last thing for us to do is just kind of redefine a little bit of kind of what's happening with the folds, but more importantly, maybe just a little bit more on kind of the reflective light. So obviously, you know, we indicated that there is a little bit of skylight, because if you look at the ground that's closest to us on the left side, there's a little bit of blue there. So I think there's a good opportunity for us to kind of introduce maybe a little bit of skylight at some point. But I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of see if there's anything else that we need to add, or just kind of just clearly define a little bit. Let's see here. I'm just gonna have a clear overlap right here. Just gonna define just a little bit of a shadow here on this thing. Nothing too crazy or fancy. I still want this to have a little bit of that nice sketch quality, so I'm just going to reinforce a little bit more of the folds here. Kind of let that taper out a little bit. And then let's use our pattern stamp again. Gonna put a little trim or something on like the edge of the hoodie. Oh, that's nice. How about that? That's pretty cool. To give something, some sort of like interesting little pattern or design. Oh, starts to get a little crazy, right? So, you know, pick and choose how you want to do it. Again, there's several modes. You can use it as a regular texture mode, or you can use it as impressionist mode. You can really kind of apply it in any way in which you want, but a lot of times I kind of like to apply it using the soft brush, and kind of setting it on impressionist mode. It tends to work the best for me, at least from what I've seen. That's kind of a nice, right? Like a little fakey trim there. If there's anything else you can add, you can kind of sneak it into the painting. Just adds a little bit of that like nice quality to it. Okay, so at this point, I'm just gonna start defining a little bit more of the shoulder pads here, because I felt like a little bland. I think we can use a little bit of a design here. So I'm thinking maybe something circular. Again, it's on the upper part of the torso, so I definitely want a little bit more definition here. Kind of add some design details that's similar to maybe the mask or something. Kind of give it like the same design language of some sort of speak. I'll punch out a little bit more of the lighting there, just to have it be a little bit more defined and more clear. Add a little bit more to the clothing here, just a tad bit. Okay. Just define just that garment that's right there, or the cloak that's like right on the shoulder. Make that a little bit more punchier. So again, I'm just kind of cleaning up anything that's kind of like a little bit loose in terms of like areas that are a bit unclear. So all the other stuff that's a bit more sketchy, like the bottom part of the feet, I'm gonna leave relatively sketchy. But if there's anything that's kind of more in the you know, that's completely ambiguous, then I need to definitely kind of make sure that it's pretty clear. But at this phase, it's not too bad, right? I mean, we're getting close to our 2-hour mark here. And I definitely want to kind of you know, give it a little bit more punch, but you know, I don't want to beat the painting to death, you know, with too much rendering. But it's at a good point for me to kind of start, you know, considering this to be a little bit more closer to done. Okay, so I think at this point I want to do one of two things. I'm going to compress all this down, obviously just beef up a little bit more of the details here slightly, but more importantly, I just want to make sure that, you know, some of these any last bits, for some reason, like I feel like when I compress the image, it's like it's me saying it's close to done. So I'm just gonna add just a little bit, these extra little bits of information and detail here. And just suggest some things. Okay, just kind of look at all that. And then we did talk about adding that reflective light, so I'm going to get to that point in just a second. So I think at this point, I'm just looking at anything else. If there's anything else that's kind of missing, you know, see if there's anything that's kind of lacking in the image, whether it's lighting or whether it's the overall, you know, the brush economy looks okay by my standards at least, you know, and just try to figure out if there's anything else that's kind of missing. So I'm just making really small micro decisions, because again, a lot of the big decisions have been made. So the micro decisions are just little bits of lighting here and there, little bit of maybe just some lost edges here. Maybe bring in a little bit of the shadow here, peek through. Again, it's just like really tiny things. That's not necessarily gonna, you know, make the image nor break it, but it's just little things for ourselves, you know. Just kind of define a little bit more of the clarity here. Kind of get rid of that. It's a bit distracting, or just keep it more simple. Add a little bit of that yellow in the distance, and I think I'm going to use this as a use our character as a mask, but I want to add a little bit of this slightly more yellow range. I'm going to use our nice broad brush here to kind of fade that in. Okay, now I'm going to use this thing called the lookup table. The lookup table is awesome. So it's under adjustments, and you basically go down, and it's basically the Instagram of Photoshop. So I believe this mode is only available for CS6 or Photoshop CC, but there's a lot of fun little things that you can get from it, like different lighting scenarios, different color variants, and all these little cool things. So I'm actually looking for more of that reflective light, right? So I went down to this here, which is more of a bluish tint, and I'm going to use this as a mask to kind of reveal a little bit more of that bluish kind of color into our scene, just to say, hey, you know, there is definitely some skylight coming through, and we're definitely seeing it on the actual clothing, or anything that's mega reflective. We're going to see it on the actual materials. Maybe have it a little bit in the shadow areas a bit. This probably is a little too much, but you know, do it, you know, and kind of take away what you don't need. But yeah, that's about it. Well, this pretty much concludes the demo, guys. I hope you enjoyed. You know, last but not least, do a, you know, unsharp mask. But let me know if you guys have any questions. And thank you again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.